Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Kubernetes 124 release retrospective. My name is Jeremy. I'll be your moderator for today. The agenda, if you are looking for it, is available here. Grab the document and drop it into the chat. Thanks for volunteering to take notes, Ray. It's good to see everybody. Everybody from the 124 release team, folks that were on previous release teams and are joining us again. Anybody from the community that's watching this later, welcome as well. In part 1 of this retro, we went through quite a bit, and we landed into the what we'll do differently in 125 and beyond. So that's kind of a good time to pick things up since 125 is going to get started. If you added anything in the previous sections, we'll go back to that after this, but we'll start with where we left off previously, continue through there, and then feel free to add any topics that you want to talk about, either in the shout out section, what could have gone better, and we'll pick those things up. Just drop into the chat if you add anything, and we'll scroll back and get things. Let me share my screen so that we can all kind of share one visual of what we're doing. And then we can go ahead and get started. Give me one more second. And as I am bringing this up, just a quick reminder, this meeting is covered by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so please be mindful of the things that you say. And this meeting is being recorded, so it will be available on YouTube later. So if you'd like to have your camera off or whatever, feel free to turn that off now. DM me if you have anything you want to say, and happy to bring that up with privacy mode enabled. With that said, let's go ahead and I haven't used Zoom on this. This is like a brand new Mac, so I've got to do the system preferences allow sharing thing. Thanks, Mac. 1 second. Hopefully this doesn't make me restart. I had a Teams, so I'm at Microsoft again, and of course I have to quit and come back. Good times. Okay, I'll be right back. Oh, hold on. Let me make James the co-host so that we don't lose the meeting.
Can we chat amongst ourselves?
Yeah, go ahead and chat amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
It is still being recorded though, so unless we cut it out,
all right.
random chatter is going to end up on YouTube.
Oh wait, I don't think I have to share. Oh, restart. Cool. It worked.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Well
It was fibbing. Okay, so where we left off previously was right before Leo had a couple of topics.
Jeremy, I can't see a damn thing because it's so small.
It's so small. Okay, let's see.
That dock is far away.
Okay, how's that?
That's better, thank you.
Is that better? Cool. You don't have gigantic monitors? Okay, so Leo, do you want to start us off with this? And we'll time box this section to, we've got a couple of items in here. We'll set this to 15 minutes. If there's nothing else, we can continue, go back to anything, but just to kind of set some time box. So if there's anything else that folks want to come back to, we'll have some time to do that. So Leo, take it away with your first.
Yeah, so this one is just a small one. So in the last releases, there have been feedback that it's not that easy to get through the entire handbook. The CI/CD handbook in particular is, I don't know, 20 pages long. So we figured it would be a good idea to have like a one-pager, which just summarizes basically what the CI/CD team is doing. This should also be quite useful for new folks who are thinking, do I want to join this team or not? So to get a quick overview, and also together with that, both fall into the onboarding category. So together with that, we also thought it would be a good idea to record some small clips to show just how like the daily work does look like. So for example, if we report a go or no go for the release card, for example, how does this look like? So it's just, yeah, I think it would be quite helpful. The one-pager handbook is already merged, so it's already available. The recordings are in progress. So we have a few recorded and a few not yet. That's it.
All right. Any comments or discussion about this item?
They're happy to help out if you need anything done on that.
Yeah, I will. So the recordings are done by Laura. She was in 1.24 one of my shadows, and I will sync with her again how what the latest status is. And if she needs help,
Cool.
I can let you know, or I will help myself. Thank you.
All right. You have the next one as well. Do you want to?
Right.
To
The
jump
next
into that?
one, yes. The next one is about Sippy. So this is a tool which we also discussed in one of the SIG release or release engineering meetings. It's basically a dashboard which summarizes all the test grid jobs. So it gives us an overview about the history basically of the jobs that are shown on test grid. So you don't have to walk over a lot of pages, dashboards, and so on. So you have everything at once. And that's, yeah, basically something that we figured does look like quite promising, but we need to first try it out. So we thought it would be a good idea to have a pilot for 1.25, and the CI signal lead for 1.25 is also informed. So yeah, let's see how this goes. I'm still in contact with the working group reliability. So around this, basically this tool emerged kind of. So it's developed by OpenShift, open source team. They use it, and yeah, let's see.
Awesome. I think that sounds like a good idea to try out for 125. Does anybody, is there any work that needs to be done for that? Anything that we should create actions for?
No, not really. So in the future, because this is right now hosted on not a Kubernetes community owned infrastructure, it's owned by Red Hat, I believe. So if we would like to use this tool in the future, then we might need to migrate this over and host it ourselves. But this is not an action item for 1.25. This is like later.
Okay.
Looks really good.
Any questions or comments around that item?
Looks awesome. Looks really, really good.
All right. The next one was mine. And I think we kind of addressed this a little bit. In previous releases, generally when we went to the burn down meetings, especially when they were like in getting into daily burn down meetings, sometimes there wasn't really much to report. It was just kind of a status update. There wasn't really anything pressing to tackle. And as we've gotten to a much more diverse, globally spread out team, I was just curious, some other SIGs, Contribex as a good example, have gone to Slack meetings where they have a thread and they kind of hold the meeting asynchronously inside of that, rather than getting everybody onto a synchronous call when there wasn't really necessarily anything to discuss or to push forward. Does it make sense to consider doing that more long-term for the releasing meetings? Like they're obviously a good opportunity for folks to connect and just have that sense of camaraderie and team.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
also, okay.
I thought that the frequency of meetings was good from the standpoint of giving people in multiple geos the opportunity to all sync up, because we had the meetings that were more like Pacific time friendly and also more elsewhere friendly. With that being said, I think towards the end of the release, especially when things got delayed, it seemed like the frequency of meetings dropped to almost zero. And so I know, at least for me, it was tough kind of keeping my finger on the pulse of the release without having the regular meetings. So maybe some middle ground between every day and not at all.
Grace, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when the bring down meetings happen in hands but doesn't really participate much or like doesn't have any status update. So I would say like the Slack check-in worked out for us, but also like for go and no go things, like I'm not sure how like I can respond faster or like make sure I'm not a blocker, because for enhancement at that point it's always green. So I just want to put that out there.
All right, next was James.
Yeah, so we tried doing this a little bit in the latter parts of this release. I think the big mistake I made was I kept one meeting a week, but I kept it in a time slot which most attendees could not make. And I think that was a mistake. I think that I should have put it in either a usual kind of this kind of time or something like that. The reason I put it there initially is because I wanted it to be a kind of like go, no go for the remaining RCs and finally the release, but I think that didn't work out. And I think we did lose some of the community at the end there. So I think if we do this again, I would say, yes, keep at least one meeting a week and make sure it's a big one that everyone can attend. Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, I don't know who is next, Nate or Joe. Nate's first on my screen, so we'll go with Nate first.
Okay, I don't mind going next. This relates to something I put down a little bit lower in the doc, and I think that leading up to our planned release date, the meeting cadence was good, but once we had to punt, then I think that's where things got a little bit confused, and folks, for instance, had to take vacation and went away. So I think we had not only meetings in maybe the wrong, not wrong, in time zones that folk couldn't make. We were also in a space where we maybe hadn't thought of or planned or worked out what the contingencies were for communications because the release had been extended. So in my comment below, I'd like to suggest that future releases, as a part of their planning, build in communication contingencies for if the for whatever reason, either folks maybe aren't able to make it anymore, but if the release goes along, maybe there is a shadow who can step up if the lead is out or things along those lines. But I felt like the primary cause was the extension and folks having to wander off for whatever reason, and for often very good reasons. But it's just the communication fell off so precipitously. It felt like that, especially with some of the like by the time we hit the release, a lot of the disciplines had already completed, right? Like they were always going to be green, but there are other disciplines that sort of ramp up quite a lot at the end and still need the communication time. So
I think that's a good idea, and maybe we can take an action to figure out who should own building that kind of contingency plan up. And is that the release team lead, or should it be comms, EA? I don't know. I think it's a good idea though, just like to make sure that there are some plans in place in case things go long, especially if it's going long like more than a day or two, just to make sure that we can identify somebody that can step up. And Joseph, you were next.
I'll echo. I agree with everybody with what's been said. Kind of aligned with James. I did feel like there's just something kind of like, I don't know if it's magical, but I do feel like anytime you're going to release something, you should be getting together. And I know it's not always available for everybody, but whether it was that Monday and Tuesday of that week, we should have had in-person meetings. I think that would have just been the capstone for the release. But outside of that, I think we did fairly well with kind of trying to do that asynchronous. Let's keep doing more of that. I think that is very inclusive of all the geos.
Okay, James, you have your hand back up.
Yeah, just to kind of follow on from what we were just talking about with regards to we need to have something written down for what happens when we delay. I think that, and this is probably an action for me, we should add a section to the lead handbook which describes what to do if the release is delayed. Because it doesn't happen often. I think that like this was delayed, and like I think another release last year was delayed by like 2 days, and the other long delay was like 119.
Mhm.
But I think it's now happened enough that we can write some vague guidelines about what to do. That would be
Okay.
my feeling.
Okay, do you want to take an action to
Yeah,
do that?
I have to do that.
All right, great.
And a big point of that will be make sure to keep on with the in-person meetings, because I think I agree, that's something we should have done better.
All right, that was a lot of great discussion. Does anybody else have anything they would like to mention or bring up with this topic before we move on? All right, James, you have the next one. How do people find meetings pinned to UTC?
So yeah, speaking of meetings, normally on the release team, meetings are pinned to Pacific time, and that is, I think, partly a historical thing,
Mhm.
and partly because most contributors are in or very near to Pacific time. As a small act of rebellion from someone who is based in Europe, I put all of the meetings in UTC and didn't move them when we entered daylight savings in either time zone or any time zone, and just kind of did that. And I was later talking to Bob, who told me that it is apparently the policy that we don't do that. We don't put meetings in UTC, which I didn't know, which is why I didn't do that. So what did people think about having them in UTC? Was it confusing? Was it annoying? Was it weird that it moved? Thoughts, opinions?
I think it was okay. I guess if Bob says don't do it, we can not do it. But I think it was okay. The only drawback I had as an East Coast person who sometimes relays things from Europe into the West Coast when they wake up is that the earlier UTC-based meetings were even too early for me. So I think moving forward, it's not so much the time zone we choose, but making sure that we can follow the sun a little bit better. You know, 4 a.m. in Pacific is, well, they're not going to make it. 7 a.m. is pretty much a stretch for me too. I can do 8:30, and that's a big difference. And then I can fill people in. You know, Nate, I think Nate at least a few times was like, "Hey, did you hear anything from the sort of the Europeans?" I was like, "No, I did not. No, it was 7." So that's kind of my only take. I don't mind the time zone. I think we're all engineers. Most of our logs are in UTC, so I'm okay with that.
All right, next was Mickey.
Yeah, I would just add, as a Pacific time person, 4 a.m. was a little bit untenable. Like I'll get up for 7 o'clock calls. I had to do that for all the Docker Shim meetings this year, but 4 a.m. was not super doable for me. So I don't hate the idea of doing UTC as some sort of global standard, but I actually thought that what we did actually sometimes this release by having like one meeting in UTC and the rest in PT, or some balance of the two, might be a better way of accommodating folks in different time zones.
Okay, next was Nate.
I like meetings in UTC just because I like not privileging one time zone over another. I didn't know that there was a sort of a thing, a policy against it, but I think one of the ways, one of the things that I might try to add to the Shadow handbook is that attending meetings isn't just about like attending the meetings and representing your discipline at the meeting. It's about bringing that information back to the discipline. So we were lucky in that we had on the docs team folks from I think 4 different of the 5 of us. I think there was like 4 or 5 different time zones. I think it was 4 different time zones that we were working in, and so we were able to have coverage across all of them. But what I asked them to do when they attended was to bring any information back to the, in our case, the SIG release, no, sorry, the release docs Slack channel, so that we could communicate everything sort of back to the group, so that we were all sort of aware of anything that we needed to do. So yeah, I'm +1 to UTC, and having we're a worldwide project. We need to build in, or rather, we should build in systems to help us to manage the communication.
All right, Joe, you're next, and then Rob.
So I guess my comment would be more related to when we tried to follow UTC with the time change. I thought that was detrimental. It went, and I think for two reasons. One is, when I look from just kind of like geodiversity, like I would love to see these meetings further apart to enable more people to participate, because there is something to, even if it's virtual, it's great for in-person for people to sync. And I felt like the two meetings we had started to get too close. And then it also hit a lot of people on the West Coast at a time where we're kind of coming out of pandemic. Some people have commitments with family and all these things. It just really was challenging. And for someone like myself, where I work kind of like some of the other people on platforms, you're hitting like the hottest spot that us on the West Coast got to deal with. So participation is tough. As far as just like overall, I don't see any issue with UTC, but I would just say, as long as we kind of like define our meeting times are set, I just think consistency is really important.
Okay, Rob.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Just a clarifying question. When you say set, do you mean that they should or should not move in? They shouldn't move in UTC.
We went from 9 a.m. to 8 a.m. on the Pacific Coast, I think. And I know we kind of like talked about it from a lead's perspective. I didn't chime in on that one because I just felt like that was the lead's decision, but I just felt like it was detrimental.
Sure. Okay. So you would like to see it move with daylight savings when there's daylight savings in the middle of
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Keep that consistent time.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Rob, and then Grace again.
Yeah, I'd agree with Joseph there. Agree with the consistency. Well, I saw Bob's comment, James, when he said, "Oh, that's why we don't schedule in UTC," and I felt his pain, because I have that pain when I'm reasoning about time zones with which I am not familiar. So in theory, I like the idea of having UTC plus a number in order to be able to have a crack at reasoning about it. But there's multiple layers of issues here. So in terms of scheduling and in terms of consistency, forget the time zone, same time every day, same interval of meeting, etc., is important no matter where you are. So I +1 for what Joe was saying there. The other thing is that from a dyscalculia point of view, for people who struggle with dates and times, and I will be one of those people, we need some computer automatic software-based solution to present dates in such a way that we can all understand them. There's lots of little UX issues when it comes to talking about time zones. The classic one is when we talk about IST, I always have to remind my colleagues that other countries that begin with the letter I are available. So it's not necessarily India Standard Time; it could be our Standard Time. So there's multiple layers of issues there when it comes to reasoning about meetings time. It's a tricky one. But the one idea I would put forward in terms of tackling time diversity is to think of it as a relay race, and to think of our colleagues who are waking up first as being the people with the baton first, and that if we can consistently schedule meetings for if we divide the world up into four segments and say, right, okay, every day people in this set of time zones are going to have a specific time, and that if enthusiastic participants want to be in 2 legs of the follow the sun race, that they could step up and take a lead position on that to hand over the baton, as it were. I only suggest that from a CI signal point of view. But having said that, that doesn't have to be big ceremony about handing things over, because ultimately, if we do our job correctly, picking up the baton is as simple as going to a project board. So yeah, they're just some random thoughts on that.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to time box this one. We can come back if there's some time at the end to add more context. But Grace has to go to class soon, so I'm going to pass to her to talk about her topics that are below, and then we can come back.
Yeah, I can't miss my intro to OS class, the fundamentals. So the 2 points there I want to bring up, like not even clarify an exception documents. The one point I really want to bring up today is when exception communicate to the enhancement communicated to the enhancement team that they are no longer participating in the release. And so we remove them from the sheet, or they're never in the sheet in the first place, and then they go ahead and merge code. And so we've had that happen, I think like 2 or 3 times. And one time James was able to remove or revert to the code. The other time was too late, and we didn't want to risk the stability of the release at that point. And for me, that didn't feel like the best of intentions. And it kind of created bad precedence, because if everyone started doing that, there's really no point of the enhancement team. So I want to hear what people think, what we should do moving forward.
We've definitely had that problem in past releases as well. The update to client Go as a prime example, like that happened really late in the 119 or 120 release, whichever one it was. And it was too late to revert things, and there was no cap for it. There might've been a cap, but it wasn't like it wasn't tracked. And it's hard to do those things. And we don't really have a stick other than doing reverts. And I think it comes down to, you got everybody tracking those things closely and kind of figuring out. One thing that might be useful is that once we hit code freeze, there is more restriction put in place. Like I think right now, anybody that has milestone maintainer can still add things to the milestone. We had that like at the end of 120 as well. I think there was some fix that went in, or some change that went in, and they milestoned it and it went in, and there's not much you can do beyond that other than go and do reverts. So I think maybe there's a tie in here with the stability or the reliability working group to maybe discuss, like, when we get to code freeze, is there additional gates we can put in place, or are there things we can do to be more restrictive? And then also maybe, like you said, that there maybe weren't great intentions there. There also might have been, I think in a lot of these cases, there's also like just not familiarity with things. So I think that there's probably an opportunity for us to go and revisit all of the SIGs and just walk through and level set things again, to make sure that everybody's on the same page before we have to invent or go and like research and invent more sticks to put in place. And if you think there is a single SIG that would benefit from this kind of conversation, we can name them now, or we can follow up offline, and somebody from SIG release can come and have a conversation with them at their next meeting if you'd like to have that done as well. I'm happy to go do that.
I think that kind of leads into what I was going to say. I think that, there's a couple of instances where this happened, and like those 2 that happened at the end that were too late to take out. I haven't chased it up yet. I've been meaning to, but I've not had a chance. But I think like my first port of call with this is really to find out why this happened. Like, was this a case of someone just didn't understand the process and just made a mistake? Was this a case of someone just forgot? Or was this a case of someone felt the process was stupid and so they ignored it? And trying to understand, and I'm not saying that is the case, I'm just saying that that's trying to understand what happened and why would help us, rather than immediately reaching for a bigger stick. And maybe what we need is a stick, but I'd like to try to understand what's going on.
I think the revert is a stick. And I think that by exercising that, it's good precedence. Like, it'll happen again. If like, we will do this again, and we will not be afraid to revert things that have subverted the process and haven't gotten it. So I think it's worthwhile CC for 125 to keep that in mind. Yeah. Mickey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, on my end, it was almost the reverse. And obviously, this is a difference between comms and enhancements. But for us, what would happen is we'd have SIGs opt in to deliver feature blog posts and drop off the face of the planet. we'd get confirmation from them. And then literally in some cases, like we had a blog post that was scheduled for Monday this week that's just not going to happen. And then also the one that was scheduled for today is not going to happen. And this is after we've gotten confirmation for them. So I don't really know what the best mechanism is, but Jeremy had said communicating expectations with the SIGs, and I think that is absolutely required.
Okay. Any other topics on this one? Grace, does that cover your next one too, or do you want to mention that? If you need to drop off, feel free to drop off too. We can...
I think it's covered. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a bit of time now, so I can cover the one before this is the exception situation.
Mhm.
I think there was quite a few of exception or confusion on exception, like a few from bulk triage that they file exception request. And I think there's a case where the enhancement author disagree with the decision of the release team. So something interesting to point out and would benefit from documentation.
Okay. Do you think that you could write some words in the exception process that's documented now to clarify anything?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll give you an action for that. Anything else on this topic? I think there was another, maybe not. James has one now. This is right before this. Confusion around how out of tree works. I think this comes up all the time. So maybe in the enhancements handbook, we need to clarify really explicitly how out of tree and in tree things work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I was just release lead, and before that, I'm a former enhancements lead, and I still don't fully understand how out of tree works. It's just really confusing. It's like, do they need to get tracked or not? Do they need to meet the deadlines or not? Do they get release notes or not? And it's like not super clear. I think there is an answer out there, and I think the answer is that they can be tracked if they want to be.
Yeah.
And if they're tracked, then yes, they have to meet all the deadlines. But the only thing that they get out of being tracked is like they get to be on the release notes and the release blog and that sort of stuff. But they don't have to be tracked if they don't want to be, because we don't enforce it. But maybe that's wrong. Ray, am I wrong?
Yeah, go for it, Ray.
I was going to state the same, but I think we should have this define this in the handbook.
Mm-hmm. We can. So I think it's worthwhile documenting exactly what we think it should be, and then letting people tell us if it's wrong. And if it's wrong, then we can adjust. But I think we should codify what we think the process is and iterate from there if needed. Cece, go ahead.
Yeah, just curious, like if the out of tree work share the same like release timeline, and would it be like filling into the similar kind of requirements?
I mean, that's kind of the key thing. The release of Kubernetes is really tied to Kubernetes repo. The things that are built out of tree don't have to follow the same cadence. So they don't necessarily have to meet the same deadlines, right? Like, because they're not necessarily cutting a release of whatever that out of tree repo is on the same timeline as KK.
I guess there's a misunderstanding here. When I talk about out of tree, I also counted like the staging stuff, like the code under staging.
Yeah, I think when we're talking the out of tree things, it's really purely those things that are out of tree and don't fall into that category. James, do you want to clarify, James?
Yeah, I just want to clarify one more thing about this as well. I agree with your point, Jeremy, is that this gets extra confusing when we have enhancements that have a in-tree component and an out-of-tree component, and the two don't make sense without each other. A great example of that is the CSI plugin migration thing we had this time around, where they're pulling a bunch of stuff out into CSI plugin, whereas like the work is like out of tree primarily, but the in-tree part cannot go without the out-of-tree part as well, so it has to be tracked, if you see what I mean. But
to me, that feels like it's still an in-tree thing because it has that dependency and it's making a change in tree. That feels like it should be anyway. Anyone else have on this before we go back to the ones
Yeah,
we
I
didn't
feel
hit before?
people have different definition of out of tree because I used to read a CAP when
Mhm.
they refer to out of tree, they refer to like the repo under staging,
Mhm.
and yeah, so
Yeah, so
maybe that
it's-
clarified would help.
It's probably really good to clarify exactly what we think it means and what it doesn't mean in the enhancements handbook. Like to James's point too, like there's a thing that's happening and it's deleting something in tree, maybe. Like, does that count? Like, I think we should just clarify. Makes sense, I think, to clarify so that people have a better understanding. We have the same verbiage to work off of. Okay, let's go back. Joseph, you had a topic on selecting a diverse release team.
Yeah, so I think one thing I noticed at the beginning of the release cycle was when working with some of the leads and helping them to kind of like review their teams, kind of make sure we're representative, is a little bit of the challenges around kind of like, you know, making sure your team is balanced. And I think this is something that is just industry wide, so it's not unique to this team. But I did kind of reach out to Sid Contrabex to kind of talk about specifically like what could we do. And there is limitations in regards to what we can do with our form, which only really kind of gives you a limited signal of where someone's from, as well as their pronouns, and then you're just kind of making judgments from there. And so what I was suggesting is perhaps a little bit of like bias training around, a lot of times we just have these things inherent within ourselves, just selecting what we're familiar with or whatever may be similar to our background. And this may help. And I know in the past, this has been a thing since I've been part of like 6 release cycles. I've seen where we've got some teams where, you know, sometimes leads have selected individuals, whether it's from their same region or, you know, similar gender. And so what I really want to do is just try to help give individuals, when there's not a lot of like clarity, how do you go about like identifying ways to have a diverse team? But overall, I would say I was actually really proud of the way the team really stepped up. I thought we had a pretty diverse team. We do have some gaps in areas of like, you know, the Far East, I think is definitely an area of opportunity, as well as Latin America. And so what I'm hoping is that this is just that first step to be able to help us be able to build the teams and help people feel like, hey, there's an opportunity for me there. Because I think we may be unknowingly limiting what this release team's representation looks like. So I think the only action I was going to follow up on is Paris asked me to, there's an issue open that I'll add to that will kind of explain this, but that's just, I thought would help future teams down the line.
That'd be great. Can you link that issue into the stock so that it's there
Yes.
for folks to, that'd be super awesome. Ray, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I took the Linux Foundation inclusive speaker training, and I think it might be helpful. I haven't taken the new one, which I need to, but it's a training that folks who are going to be SIG leads or SIG tech leads or sub project owners have to take. And so I think this, and it's a free course, doesn't take a long time, but I think it might be impactful to what Joseph just mentioned.
I had added that as a requirement for release leads and the shadows. Does it make sense to extend that to all the role leads?
You might just extend that.
It doesn't take that much time, but I feel like
No.
the information is important.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty useful as well.
Good. It's useful training.
So maybe we add that as an onboarding requirement for the incoming role leads. You want to add an action item for me to add that to the handbook, and I can do that. And then I can work with you to make sure we get that going for 125. Maybe we need to do it for 126. I don't know. I think it's probably fine to do it now, but we can discuss when we want to put that into place. Rob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, can I just to back up Joe there? One of the areas of overwhelm when it comes to team selection is that spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
So the overwhelm comes in 2 forms. One is you could have 200 applicants, and then there is the, what would I say, the colorlessness or the of just trawling through that data. It's very hard to it has to be pointed out to you. And I think I got assistance when I was the CI signal lead, to think from a diversity point of view. But aside from that, it's just it was probably the hardest task. And I participated in and led CI Signal, but I found from an admin point of view, that was the trickiest task. But I will say also, the release lead gave me good support on that for when I was given that task to do.
All right, Mickey, you're next.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was going to add the opposite problem can be a problem as well, where in my case, I had very few candidates to select from for comms. And I think we did a great job as far as geographic and other types of diversity within our group. But with that being said, I think that it can be tough. Obviously, people always talk about the pipeline problem, but we need to maybe try to figure out how to encourage folks to join not just one group, but all groups, and then also figure out a way of getting people to continue to remain engaged throughout the release process. And I have another item about that we'll probably get to tomorrow.
All right. Any other topics or questions, comments on this one? Ray, do you have anything to add, or is your hands just still up? Okay, cool. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. So let's just keep burning through these things, and then we can revisit. I know, Mickey, you said you added something under.
I moved it to this section. So
okay, cool. Perfect. So we can get to it. So you have the next one, update the comms handbook with more detail around removals and stuff. So take that one away.
Yeah, I wonder if this may be something that doesn't just impact comms, but I know we had a major rev, like Jesse kindly did a major revision to the comms handbook before the 124 release. But I think we have to do one step further. Comms is a handbook that's very dependent on a lot of other teams, and so it can be tough to see everything that you have to kind of get ahead of. And so there were a lot of things that I just wanted to make sure we're discussed in more depth, and I'll be happy to create the PR on this. But I think, for example, details around the removals blog or the features blog outreach process were things that were lacking. And so I want to make sure that whoever the next person is, doesn't just have, me and Jess and Karen to rely on from the last few releases, but also can just, take a look at some clearer examples of what they're supposed to be delivering. Also, things about collaborating with other release leads or teams would be useful. One thing that I ran into is, being very dependent on other teams and having a very difficult time getting answers from them. So I don't know if there's a better way that we can go around doing that. And I added another topic to discuss that later down.
Does anybody else have feedback or anything to discuss on this one? So as an action, go ahead.
So I was going to say the obvious call out here is that each handbook should evolve. And so as the lead just come through, like the reason you got those updates from me is I inherited a handbook that didn't really serve me well enough. So yeah, for sure, jump in there, add more stuff, talk to other people who've done the lead, talk to the incoming lead, say, have you looked at this? Do you need anything else? Oh, I can answer that, put it in there. That makes a lot of sense that you feel that way. Like it just needs more. Especially there, because that was a new thing.
That's definitely a good call out. I think all the incoming leads should take an action to review the handbook and update it as necessary, because it's going to serve as kind of the foundation for the shadows that are coming in as well.
And maybe outgoing leads as well.
Yeah, the outgoing leads work with the incoming leads to maybe get those going. Specifically for comms, since you called this one out, but I think, Ray, we should follow up with all of the incoming and outgoing folks to be able to make sure that there's nothing gapping there. It's a good call out, Jesse. Thanks. Okay. Anything else on that one before we move on? Okay, so we're going to jump over those ones that we just discussed. Nate, your first one here is release dates are aspirational. Take it away.
I think we touched on this earlier, but I think, and I may be incorrect here, but because release dates can shift and have shifted, I know that I had thought before the the project that, oh, hey, you know what, I'll take a vacation immediately after the original release date. I didn't get to take those 2 days. And I think there were a few folks who were in the same boat, but potentially had travel. And I'm not trying to call anybody out. But what I would like to suggest is that we, at the beginning, at the onboarding, suggest that, you know what, these release dates are not set in stone. And probably it would be prudent not to book things within a week or so of the proposed release date, just because it could change. And so it's not something that I think should be set as an absolute hard and fast rule, but it might be a good suggestion to make to folks.
I think one thing that I would add to that is that definitely people have lives too, and we should all be flexible, and we should all be willing to support each other. I mean, it's part of the reason we have shadows too. Like, we are trying to identify people that can continue their role, but also the shadows are there to learn, but also to help us out. And I think that it's probably a good thing to have the discussion, like at the beginning, like you mentioned. Discuss who has extra flexibility, because some people don't. People may be in school, people may have work trips or whatever. And like, I don't think anybody should feel like they have to cancel personal trips because of a slip in the release date. Like, there are more people that can step up, and like, we will always come back and backfill. So maybe it's an expectation setting.
That's a good way of putting it. I don't want to suggest that. I mean, Jesse and Ray and Victor and my shadows all were very, very supportive. I wound up doing the docs release activities while at a company offsite. So I mean, it was definitely something that we could do. But I had it in my head that, oh, this is the release date. We'll release on this date, and that's not necessarily the right expectation to set.
Yeah,
and like I said, I'm not trying to call anybody out. I think that we got it at the door, and things were successful. But it's just I would have changed my plan had I realized that there was a higher possibility of things like that happening than I realized.
I wouldn't say it's a very high possibility. I mean, just looking at previous releases, like I say, most of them, this is pretty unprecedented. It's like 119 2 years ago was the last one. So this is on average once every couple of years event, I think.
I think a day or two slip can be expected. I think doing more is probably a little out of the ordinary. Like for 120, we almost had to slip because there were some things that were broken like the Friday before, and people did Herculean things over the weekend to get the tests looking good again. And then we had a little bit of, but like it definitely can happen.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would add is, at least for me, with the way that comms works, I felt like I could have used more support for folks toward the end of the release. And I know obviously everyone has their own lives and vacations and stuff coming up. But you know, there were things that I needed to have as part of the release form. For example, like I called out major themes, and we didn't have major themes until 3 days before like the end of the extended release timeline. And so that was extremely stressful for me because I wasn't getting responses from anybody. So I don't know if there's a better way of making that happen.
Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, I might pick up that thread. I don't think it's directly related to what Nate brought up, but I think comms in particular, in my experience, could use more support from the overall team. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you just, you do the blogs. There's a lot of stuff there and you don't really own it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this should be its own retro thing. It's just kind of occurring to me. So I'm sorry if I'm like wasting 3 minutes of everybody's time, but like, it's just occurring to me that from what Mickey said, 'cause that was my experience too. And we didn't slip. It's just hard. And I think not a lot of people do that and end up as leads. Like, so James, I'm not calling you out, but there's not a lot of people that go from comms to lead. Like, there's not a lot of people that have done that. It's maybe worth talking about because it's a really critical aspect of the end of the release, and everybody's done or everybody's hair's on fire doing other stuff. So
Can you add this as
something?
Can you add it as another item so we can have a more in-depth discussion tomorrow?
Yeah. I also think that comms is the only discipline that extends regularly past what the release would be. I mean, there's some docs cleanup, but generally speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it is regularly being worked on a week out, potentially 2 weeks out because of the feature blogs.
Yeah, or in this case, end of May is when the last feature.
So Nate,
Yeah.
so Nate will remember that 122 went a full month.
All right, Ray, and then James, and then we'll call time on this one and move on because we only have a few minutes left, so we'll probably have to punt the rest of these until tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the only thing I want to bring up about, and I've seen this as well. I was in contact with Mickey during the release for comms, that I feel like for things that need cross-team communication support, I think lead shadow should be a part and should help communicate that or help lead that or help facilitate that. So I think that's something that may not be part of the handbook, but I could certainly suggest that in a PR and get iterated over that, and people can comment and accept if they seem it is correct.
All right, James, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was like Mickey. I will say I was really late helping with the major themes towards the end of this release. I think to make it better in future releases, I think there's no reason you couldn't select the major themes as soon as code freeze has occurred, because that's when you know what's in. So I wonder if we should add it to the timeline to be an activity like the day after code freeze should be to start draft and select the major themes. I'm not, maybe this is just my misunderstanding, but I'm not entirely clear on who owns the major theme selection. Is it the release notes lead? Is it the comms lead? Or is it the release lead? Not sure if that's fully defined.
I think
So
it's in the book, but I'll look it up. I think that's the only reason.
Yeah, I thought it was release notes.
Yeah, I think it's release notes.
And pulling major themes or asking from what major themes from SIGs are, from SIGs is hard. And we're going through this in every release cycle.
Yeah.
It's so I think in 123 we did start shortly after code freeze, but it is very difficult. And I had to suggest major themes. And I had to, go reach out. I was like, this looks like a major theme. Do you agree? So.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cece.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I didn't aware of the what's happening regarding with major theme, but since I've been leading a release notes team, and it's written in the release notes handbook, which the major theme owned by release notes team, and also including communication with all the SIGs to collect the major theme topics and discuss around and draft the major themes inside the release note directory. So there should be the some documentation around the major themes there.
So maybe just another expectation setting thing, just as the release team, make sure that everybody's aware of that. And because not everybody reads all the handbooks, and probably need to, as release lead, just make sure that everybody's on the page of like who needs support and who has the, I don't want to say the DRI hat, but the DRI hat.
I'm thinking maybe it's worth to add a column in the release schedule to highlight that, like major theme has to be done like maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the formal release date. I can add that.
Yeah, that might be a good add.
I think a +1 add to schedule. I would literally fit straight after code freeze when you know what's there, and put an item for drafting, beginning drafting a collection, probably sometime after enhancements freeze.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I add this. Thank you.
All right. I think we had really great discussion on all of these topics. We have a few things to get through tomorrow. If anybody has anything else they would like to add, feel free to do that now. If you add anything to the other sections, we can always go back to those as well. Just highlight them in a color or text or something so we know to scroll back and look for those things. Since obviously we went through those things mid-release cycle, things could have changed, and it's always good to have good call outs and what could have gone better. Just more discussion around those things. We will end now, give everybody back 2 minutes of their day and pick this up tomorrow. So if you have any items you want to add for tomorrow, feel free to add them and ping me offline to make sure we cover those things. I'll be facilitating again tomorrow. But other than that, I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. And thanks for participating in this, retro. It's always really, really useful for us to help to figure out what, for the incoming team, especially to know what things to do differently, what areas to focus on. So thank you again for your participation and your time and all your input. And again, have a great rest of your day. See you, folks.
Thanks for hosting, Jeremy.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jeremy,
Bye.
for hosting.